Welcome to this Mobile World Live webinar on how mobile operators can grow while keeping their energy usage in check. I'm David Pringle. I'm the moderator for today's webinar. So telecoms operators are under pressure to curb their energy usage, both to cut operating costs and reduce their impact on the environment. So in this webinar, we're going to look at how telcos can become more energy efficient as they upgrade their infrastructure for 5G. Now with me here in the studio, I'm pleased to say we've got some experts on this topic. I have Faisal Azir, he's Senior Project Manager at the GSMA.
Pleasure to be here, thank you for having me.
And next to him is Declan Friel, he's CTO at Aspire Technology.
Thank you, David. Delighted to be here.
Next to him is Kieran Ford, he's a segment leader data center and IT, Europe, Middle East and Africa region at Eaton.
Great to be here, David. Thanks.
And finally we have John Teasdale, he's Senior Manager with Vodafone UK.
Good afternoon, thanks for having me.
So thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. I'm going to begin with talking to each of these gentlemen in turn to set the scene, but we will take some questions from the audience towards the end of the webinar. You can enter those at any time by using the box on your screen, but as I say, we'll get to them towards the end. Faisal, if I can start with you. First of all, how big a priority is energy consumption for mobile operators?
Energy, just as a topic, is a key priority for operators. When we look at the 5G era, the business case is not quite crystallized just yet. So operators are looking at how they're going to make their money. And one of the challenges here is obviously cost optimization. That's a key priority for operators. So when we talk in terms of energy, cost optimization is a key priority for operators. Now, in a couple of weeks' time at MWC LA, the GSMA's network economics team is going to be launching a paper that looks at network cost evolution for operators in the 5G era. And one of the key areas that we look at is cost optimizers and cost accelerators within that. Now, energy, like the Aspire white paper, is going to be called out as one of the key priority areas, simply because it is going to see an increase in the 5G era. You don't necessarily need to have 5G to have a concern about energy, because we all know energy cost is increasing, whether it's on the consumer side or indeed on the business side. So what do we know? If we look at operators and their network OPEX, at the moment it's between 20 and 40%. Now, that's at the moment. If we look in the 5G era, you're looking at more sites, more traffic, more devices. And with that, you have this challenge about energy increase. There is going to be an energy increase. 140% is the number that's bandied about at the moment. But the reality is nobody's necessarily clear as to exactly what that energy increase will be. It depends on the operator's deployment scenarios. So realistically, what we do know, what we can say, is that operators are going to maintain 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G networks as well. So there is going to be an energy increase in that regard. Now, what does that mean for operators? Operators are looking at their energy in two different ways. One is around renewables and self-generation. The other side of it is looking at being more energy efficient, and that's reducing their energy consumption as it is.
Okay, so you've mentioned cost, big factor, but how important is the climate crisis in driving operators to change their practices?
On energy, there's kind of two sides of the argument. One is obviously cost, as you pointed out. The other side is about the sustainability. Climate is a key topic across any agenda for operators and CEOs across the world. With the climate action program that the GSMA has just launched at the UN General Assembly in New York a couple of weeks back, what we've done is we've said as an industry, we're going to be the first to make a commitment towards net zero carbon emissions by 2050, in line with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Now, with that, in saying that, the 50 operators who are involved, that's covering around about 4 billion connections. So when we talk about a global initiative, this is where the operators are really seeing energy is a priority, the climate is a priority. We need to tackle these together.
Got you. So, and how achievable do you think that target is? I mean, how tough will it be to get to that for the industry?
I think that operators realistically are at different areas of their journey, different parts of the journey. You've got the leading operators, people like Vodafone, people like AT&T, who are leading the way, and they have a number of projects that help to address this challenge. The other side of it is bad grid and off-grid scenarios. How do we address those in those tier 2 and tier 3 operators? So it is a challenge. A lot of operators are going to get sooner than 2050, some 2025, 2030. I guess the real question is, how are we going to address that? With Network Economics, which is the program that I look after, we identify solutions that have been verified by operators to help address energy, infrastructure, backhaul, AI and automation. Those key kind of cost buckets for operators in the future. So whilst the initial climate action activity is around carbon disclosure, that's the first step, understanding where your baseline is. The next step will be, how do we address that? And thankfully, to solutions like Aspire and Eaton, we're just starting that journey.
Yeah, so we're going to get a better understanding, hopefully, as we move around the other speakers of how we can achieve that. So Declan, turning to you, so Aspire's doing a lot of work with operators managing their networks, helping them optimize those networks. How much work do you do around energy?
Yeah, I mean, energy is something that's coming up more and more in our work. Optimizing and improving the performance of our networks is the main thing we do end to end. And we see, if we look at this from a service and a customer experience perspective, it's all about managing traffic, managing the capacity of the networks and so forth. And with energy, it's very much the same thing, about adapting capacity and adjusting capacity so that you can shut down equipment, shut down radio equipment in order to save energy.
Yeah.
And there are initiatives ongoing over the past while in this area. The vendors are contributing. They're providing some features in the radio network and so forth. And we've been involved ourselves in designing and developing those on behalf of one of the major vendors. But what we see and what we hear when we talk to operators around the globe is that these systems, they're complex to deploy. There's a lot of operational overhead with them. There are concerns or some levels of anxiety over potential impact on customer experience.
Right, yeah.
And that leads to monitoring of those, which again is a cost overhead. So in a way, there's some savings being achieved, but it's an untapped opportunity to save a lot more. And you know, we've heard from Faisal about the potential growth, and we don't know what the exact figures are with 5G and so forth, and massive MIMO and densification of networks. But if you've already got a problem, having it grow in further is a bigger opportunity that we need to tackle to save. So we've offered, or we've built software to deal with this. We've built software that automates the shutdown of equipment, capacity in the network, if you like. And that saves energy. And we do this across all vendors and technologies, leveraging the vendor investments, if you like, that are made today by both vendors and operators. And what we see is that our experience in optimizing mobile networks and also in building these features to date on behalf of vendors, it allows us to unlock that saving in a safe way. I mean, customer experience is paramount. We can't upset that.
Yeah.
We have an example where we've worked recently on a project in Asia. We've boosted the savings that the vendor equipment can bring threefold.
Yeah.
So we've gone from €1 million saving in a 10,000 network to 3 million saving. So there's lots of potential there.
Yeah, right.
We've another example with a different vendor in the Americas region where we have a 21% saving on energy in 4G network on the radio equipment end of things. So there's a lot of potential there, and I think at the moment it's untapped.
So you mentioned two very different geographies there. You're obviously working around the world. So how big are the regional differences in the approach to energy?
Yeah, there are differences. We see it. We work in different regions, as you say. For example, Africa or the Caribbean type regions, a lot of pressure on OPEX. Many sites have low revenue, high electricity costs often, unstable or unreliable grid. Potentially in the Caribbean in particular, a lot of issues with hurricanes, unfortunately, that can lead to outages. So what we are hearing is that extending service availability when you're off-grid is of interest, and being able to adapt or shut down in a controlled way to prolong the life of the network when you're off-grid is of interest.
Yeah, you've got a whole new set of factors in an emerging
Exactly,
market,
exactly. And then there's the other side of the spectrum, if you like, is the more developed markets where you might have a more stable energy grid. You're looking at rolling out 5G. Operational costs is a factor. Sustainability is a big thing, looking at getting sustainable carbon neutral solutions. But the big issue there, I think, is operators are looking at a potential significant increase in energy when they roll out 5G and they densify, and that's a concern.
Let's talk about the future. How do you see energy management evolving going forward as we work our way towards 2050?
Yeah. Faisal mentioned AI. We're doing a lot of work with AI around forecasting traffic behaviour, analysing historical traffic and forecasting traffic behaviour. It's something that we've taken from our network management business. It has huge potential to improve the efficiencies even further. The disaster recovery or network resilience aspect of service availability extension is another area. And looking at it from a demand and energy consumption perspective, adapting energy consumption or adapting demand, we think there's an opportunity there, looking at it whether it's availability of grid, whether it's pricing structures, or whether it's the amount of renewables. How can you manage your energy drawdown in a more consistent way?
Yeah.
And I think there's some opportunities there to look at the network management systems together with how energy is supplied and come up with novel solutions.
Okay, so some opportunities going forward there. Kieran, if I can turn to you now. So you've got a different angle on this topic. Eaton's got a different angle to Aspire. How do you see this changing with the advent of 5G and this densification that we're talking about?
I guess the big difference is that energy, which is now top of mind for telcos, for Eaton, energy is dead centre of our business. This is what we do. We're focused completely on energy solutions for our customers. So we're very, obviously very familiar with the domain. And what we see the unique challenge of 5G bringing is bringing this level of complexity to a telco network that generally wasn't there. With the level of power density needed, with the increase in data rates and the overlay, the fact that 5G isn't a replacement technology, it's going to run concurrently with existing systems, means that we're going to have a more complex network. But I think there's a great opportunity in that as well, David, because it's a telco environment. We have engineers used to seeing their telecoms environment as a network. Applying the same principles to the power environment means that we can start to look at an equal parallel domain of a power network inside the telecom network.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's got a great opportunity for people to start to design that power network, manage that power network. And when I listen to Declan talking about what he's doing on the network management domain, you can imagine that by combining the energy management domain with the telecom management domain, you're on the path to ultimate optimization for both the networks.
Right, you've got to bring those two together.
You've got to bring them together. Yeah.
So as we're going into this 5G upgrade cycle, what do you see as the optimal strategy for operators around renewable energy in particular?
Well, there's clearly not going to be one answer, and there's no magic wand to solve it. So I think we're going to anticipate a blended strategy from different companies and different geographies based on the economics. But there's one very important background fact. The energy industry itself, and whether that's generation or the grid operators, they're in a state of transition themselves.
Yeah.
Industry calls it the energy transition. They are moving very much towards the renewable sector because of, I wish I could say it's just because of the climate, but it's not. It's the raw economics of renewable energies costing in. And that's going to cause them to change. And I think the big thing to solve is not on-site generation or elements of site generation or renewables. That's a good blend. It's decarbonising all electricity.
Yeah.
That's the big problem to be solved. And telcos can play a part in that too.
Yeah, so there's a huge shift going on in the energy industry at the same time as we've got 5G in the telecom
Exactly.
industry.
And to box clever, you have to be cognizant of both.
Okay. Now, you're living and breathing this stuff, clearly. What practical steps should operators be taking today?
Well, it's not a poor reflection on a telco. Energy should have been taken for granted.
Right.
And it always was. It's always going to be there, right? And because you're focused on running your telco business. That no longer is the case. So the first step, practical step, has to be an energy audit.
Yeah, okay.
What assets, applications, what am I using, where am I using it, and why am I using it? And then getting some easy wins on removing other applications or assets that can be managed in a better way. But then, as I say, adopt the network philosophy when looking at the power network itself. Apply the same classical disciplines about network management and energy management. There's tremendous parallels. You know, energy is transmitted and stored and switched just like data.
Yeah.
So there's great network management disciplines that can be afforded. but also to look at the electrical domain, in that there's some great features in next generation energy aware electrical infrastructure that can have a bidirectional relationship with the grid. As the grid adopts more and more renewables, there's a risk element that it becomes unstable because of the asynchronous nature of renewables. Electrical infrastructures that are energy aware can stabilize the grid, can accelerate the adoption of renewables, can assist the grid operator. So rather than just consuming, large telco environments, data centers, 5G networks can actually contribute with grid services to accelerate the adoption of renewables and solve the bigger issue, which is decarbonising all electricity.
Okay, so telcos need to think about this in the round, essentially. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great, John, if I can finish with you then. So from an operator's perspective, Vodafone UK, how important is energy?
I think energy for us is one of the key drivers we associate with the network. So it used to be, as the guys have said, that it was a separation. Energy and networks would be two parallels that ran together. Now they're synchronmeshed. So we think of it as a network, the energy, and we're employing the same tactics that we use with the network. We're employing in real life situations with our energy management at the moment.
Great. So how are you organised internally around energy management? Do you have a separate team looking at this, or is it everybody's responsibility?
So I recently attended Vodafone's Global Energy Forum, and we had representatives from all of our markets, and every one of them has now got an energy team that's dedicated to looking at improving in energy efficiency.
Oh, right, okay.
So and within the UK, we have a dedicated team. You know, we've brought in externally real experts to help us drive that change and that efficiency.
Excellent. Okay, so finally, what's keeping you awake at night on this? What are the main challenges from Vodafone's perspective?
I think there's a number of things within our portfolio that we need to look at. I think it's the increase in traffic. So 5G is a great generator for increased traffic, but then that transmits all the way through the core, so it's not just the edge we have to worry about.
Yeah.
I also think it's the fact that the OpEx cost of energy is increasing. And then we have this ethical position that Vodafone has been very proactive, as we stated before from Faisal. So we will fully consume renewable energy by 2025 globally, and we'll also reduce our carbon emissions by 50%. So whilst it's not keeping us awake at night, it's worth investigating.
2025 is very aggressive.
It is indeed.
Yeah. No, impressive. Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to turn to the audience questions now. So please do keep inputting those through that box on your screen. We've got a few already in here, so let me put those to our panel. Faisal, there's one for you here first. How do you see the likes of solar and battery farms playing a part of the telco power infrastructure? What's being done essentially in this area? So solar and battery farms.
We're seeing a lot of movement in renewables, specifically around PPAs for operators. So we take the example of AT&T. They've made the largest purchase in US corporate history of a wind farm. And they've gone from outside the top 10 to now being top 3 in terms of renewable energy purchasing. That's one example. Vodafone, Telefonica, Orange, they're all looking at renewables and how to address this challenge. Why? As Kieran kind of pointed out, the cost of renewables is going down every year. Take a stat from IRENA. We look at the International Renewable Energy Agency. Over the last 10 years, we're looking at a 90% reduction in cost. Over the next 5, we're looking at another 50% reduction in cost. So it really comes to a point where operators are looking at grid and they're looking at renewables. And it is that economic sense. We need to move to renewables because it's now helping with the decarbonisation, the sustainability, and it's also making economic sense. So solar farms, battery farms, wind farms, they're all part of the mix to help operators address their energy consumption.
I can just bring in maybe Kieran or John quickly on this point. To what extent should operators have their own sources of energy, do you think, or renewable energy? John?
I think there's within the portfolio, there's a mix. You're never going to be 100% on-site generation. I think that PPAs play a major part for us, and then in combination with on-site generation, I think so you get a portfolio of activities you want to undertake. I don't think we don't have the land mass to have on-site generation near every one of our sites. So it's about how we are wise and how we leverage the PPAs.
Yeah. It's part of the mix.
It is indeed.
Yeah, okay. Let me take another question here from the audience. Actually, this is for you, John. And how big a share of the electricity consumed by mobile operators is green energy today, and how big a share of that green energy is actually certified?
So I can only speak for Vodafone in the UK personally, but so 12% is renewable energy from us.
Okay.
And what we consume, and it's fully certified to a gold standard. We're obviously, with our targets by 2022, we want to have done 50% renewable. So that's our biggest driver at the moment. That's one of the things we're investigating. But, you know, so we do an increase. So we're presently in a feasibility stage of building a 20 megawatt solar farm. And also we're in presently in a cycle of increasing our PPAs. And
to answer this question more broadly, Vodafone's probably a little bit ahead of some other mobile operators. You're probably not the average for the industry.
I'd like to think we're not when it comes to every element, but Vodafone is very, very proactive.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, good. All right. Got another question here, and this is, I think, for you, Kieran. Can you share any thoughts on how 5G will help to accelerate the adoption of smart grids and greener energy distribution? I mean, this goes back to what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, but I think, isn't there something interesting that it's the IT and ICT and telecom sector that seems to be leading the way in adoption of renewables? There seems to be a more earnest attempt to either bring on-site generation or bring renewables into the business model for data centers, co-location companies, for the hyperscalers and now the telco operators. And I think it's a very noteworthy that, so it's not one individual technology like 5G, even though that is going to be a trigger to accelerate it. I think what it's accelerating is the already resident view that this industry collectively needs to decarbonise energy, and that's very laudable, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a pace of change in tech and telecoms that almost means that this industry's upgrading quicker than other industries, I guess, and that has an impact on energy.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, question for you, Declan. AI, back to AI. How do you think AI can support further power savings in future?
I think a big part of it comes down to traffic management, traffic prediction, and historical traffic analysis, and understanding how to manage that. I mean, 5G is going to bring huge traffic growth. I think anybody who has deployed 5G already is starting to see that right through the network. And it's how to manage the fluctuations in traffic and understand how to plan your energy availability around that. And it's a two-way thing. It's not just about having enough energy to manage the traffic. It's about, do you really need all that traffic? Can it be balanced in a better way or managed in a better way? And AI is what we've seen, and I don't think we're the only ones doing it. I mean, AI is a very big buzzword at the moment. But the ability to predict behaviour early and accurately is something that I think AI is particularly adept at.
How close are we to having that predictive capabilities, and how accurate is it? Is this something 10 years or 5 years?
No, I think it's we've seen it in our network operations work. In particularly where it's important there is around monitoring performance of networks, and what we call anomaly detection, where you get a deviation in behaviour and you need to act on it in a back office environment where you're troubleshooting and managing service availability impacting issues. And the speed and accuracy that it works in that, in terms of detecting deviations in behaviour, is something that caught our attention really, and it applies directly to traffic prediction then. So it's here to an extent. I think you're really starting to just see it now in this year. Really, it's starting to come out, and a lot of the vendors are looking at AI within their solutions as well.
And the whole point of machine learning is it gets better and better over time.
Yes. It's the automation aspect of it that's really key here.
Got quite a few more questions here, so we'll keep this moving. This maybe for you, Faisal, I'm not sure, but correct me if I'm wrong. Will 5G improve the amount of data transmitted per watt of energy overall?
Yeah. I think it goes without saying you're going to be transferring more data, but effectively the equipment that you're going to be running is going to be more efficient.
Yeah.
The challenge really comes over the number of sites, I think, more often than not. So overall, yes, there's going to be more data. There's going to be more efficient use per bit, per watt. And I think that's it.
Do we have an order of magnitude? Do we have a number?
I'll give you a number. Because the systems aren't all pinned down and the specs aren't pinned down, but there's some analysis that has showed you can get about 20 kilobits per joule, not per watt, per joule unit of energy. Now multiply that by 500 for 5G.
Wow.
20 megabits instead of 20 kilobits
That's
per joule. So an incredible bit efficiency at the per unit energy. But it doesn't mean it's going to be overall more efficient, because as you then deploy that, you're going to still see a multiple increase in power consumed because you're transmitting more data.
Yeah.
So the numbers it looks good at a per bit level, but when you scale up to a real network, it's still to be defined that John was talking about. We still don't know the full magnitude of the power impact that's going to be for a full scale, full broadband, full spectrum rollout.
And I guess as consumers start watching 4K TV and 8K TV, obviously the amount of energy that it takes for that takes in the opposite direction.
You need significant improvement just to stand still.
Yeah.
Really, you know.
More questions, gentlemen. This one's for you, John. There are estimations that 5G networks, still on 5G here, will engage up to 2 to 3 times the energy needed by previous network generations. This is building exactly on what we've just been talking about. Do you agree? That's the question.
I think there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of data out there to back that theory. I think in live, as a business, we haven't deployed enough 5G and utilised our full spectrum to understand what the full impact is from an energy efficiency perspective.
Yeah. And a lot's going to depend on consumer behaviour.
It is. How many devices are on the network, how much data they're using, etc.
Yeah, okay. So bit of uncertainty around that. Faisal, come back to you. Do you see any particular region of the world leading on energy efficiency?
I think
in telecoms.
I think when we look at the work that we're doing in network economics, we're on this global hunt for innovation in energy, and it genuinely is multiple operators across the world. There are some leading lights amongst that. So AT&T, their energy bill is $1 billion per year. So they have 70,000 energy projects that are all helping to reduce their...
Sorry, 70,000?
70,000, yes.
Right.
But the reality is, when we look at the energy solution, there's no one solution that fits all. There's no one solution that's going to crack the whole problem. It's a number of solutions all coming together to help reduce that energy consumption. And I think that that's where the challenge really lies for operators is, how do we know that this solution is tried and tested? Is it verified? Is it good? That's the level of kind of where we're positioning network economics.
Yeah.
The solutions that we look at, they're operator verified. They come with a certain level of due diligence has been done on them to show that they're good.
I think there's an element within that. So the greatest efficiency we can do is turn legacy equipment off.
Yeah.
So that's our biggest driver at the moment. So it's to understand our full mix of energy and then reduce it by turn legacy equipment off, and then it makes the availability for new technologies we've deployed.
Yeah, I guess if you can turn off 3G, potentially you're getting a big saving there. Yeah. Declan, I just want to build on something that you mentioned earlier about emerging markets, because I'm guessing that if you're using diesel generators, for example, energy is a real top of mind issue for some of these emerging operators.
It is, yeah, it is. Among other things, because you've got you've security issues obviously related to that as well.
Right,
but yeah, if you're off grid, then it's expensive. It's not the most efficient way to supply electricity. I mean, it's very hard to adapt and make savings when you have a generator running constantly. The efficiency, it doesn't improve if you're not drawing from it.
Yeah.
So you really need to look at getting off generators, especially diesel type generators, and onto a more renewable source.
So do you think we'd find examples of best practice in emerging markets because the need is greater?
Yeah, the need is much greater.
Yeah.
I mean, we work in a lot of emerging markets where they're off grid for 20, 30%. Some markets we work in, they're off grid pretty much most of the sites that they have are off grid.
Right.
So it's a big issue.
Yeah, okay, no, that's important. Actually, staying with you, Declan, for this next question. Not entirely clear, this one. From the current energy efficiency solutions, do you see any impact on KPIs? Doesn't say which KPIs, but I'm assuming they will have an impact on energy KPIs, but
they will,
performance possibly?
Yeah, probably referring to customer experience impacts.
Yeah, right.
That has been a limitation, I would say, to certain operators deploying these type of solutions in the past. And the overhead in trying to make sure that that's not an issue is, a cost that you have to offset against the savings.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really add up if you have that issue. It isn't, in our view and in our experience, it's manageable, but It requires a level of automation to be able to tune and optimize the network. It's not something you can do manually.
Yeah.
It's something we've put a lot of effort into. It's, in my view, and in the experience we've had in many deployments in both emerging markets that we talked about earlier, but also in markets where high expectations on KPIs are the norm, we can deliver the savings without any impact on KPI.
You shouldn't have to compromise on.
No, it's not. There's no compromise required.
Okay. Right, so question here, given their name actually, so I'm assuming they want me to say this on air. Claudio Bianco from Tim Telecom Italia. What are the guests' opinions about URLLC requirement of 99.999% 5.9 service availability with respect to powering solutions that will have to be adopted? So, yeah, I guess this is a question around energy and how that would impact the 5.9s issue. Views on that?
Resilience is in the DNA of telco operators. We see it in the data center environment, we see it in the telecom environment, that is the purpose of backup supply systems, UPSs, energy storage devices, lithium-ion batteries being deployed throughout. So yeah, that has to be factored in completely. And as you design out your telco network to your SLA and to regulatory requirements, you have to factor in sufficient battery and backup energy solutions to keep the network running should you eventually come off grid.
I mean, you mentioned that there's let's say a reduction in stability as you've got more of these different energy sources, but telcos can manage that, I guess.
Well, that's why I say you started, like John has already said, Vodafone is ahead of the game in this way. Manage it as a power network.
Yep.
It is a power network. So yes, it's going to become more distributed. The idea of having an energy management system is no longer a nice idea, it's a must-have.
Right.
You must have an energy management system for a distributed network, especially when we get down to small cells, etc. You're going to have a very complex power network. It needs to be managed like a network.
But there's no need to compromise on that 5.9s.
Absolutely not. In fact, I think it will enhance it, and modern technology will enhance it. And the point I was making earlier, that same latent energy that is sitting there waiting for the disaster to happen can actually be monetized through grid services back onto the grid.
Yeah.
So it's not an idle asset.
Yeah. So the redundancy is actually not
profitable.
redundant.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, I mean, I think it does play into the discussion about reliable energy sources because, I mean, and we will see, I mean, that example in the question about latency, low latency, with 5G, there will be mission critical services running on the network. And they need to be managed with those level of KPIs, and having a reliable energy source is important.
Part of the point of 5G is getting to that level of reliability, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. There's another question here. Is going green being driven by government guidelines more, or is it a need to save OPEX? This kind of goes back to where we were talking originally, but how big a part are governments playing in this?
I think it's an important consideration. You know, a lot of governments are now looking at from the sustainability perspective around it. I think you've got to look at the two things kind of coming together. It's almost like a perfect storm. We've got the reduction in cost around renewables, and then we've got the climate and sustainability agenda. That effectively leaves no excuse for the private sector to start looking at their energy transition. It's part of the wider piece, but one of the things that I see with telco is, yes, it's the first industry to do it, but we've kind of got to get our own house in order before we start looking at wider ICT and other industries. So for the governments, yes, seeing support for renewables is there. The GSMA, we'd always support the commercial arrangements around rolling that out rather than regulatory aspects.
I mean, ideally you want to get ahead of government, don't you, really?
Yeah.
Well, I think just to add that, there's a third force, which is a very big force called the consumer. The consumer doesn't want fossil energy anymore. And if you're a large data center or a large telco, you have a huge voice as a mega consumer and saying that's not the energy you want anymore.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a clear signal. Okay, I think, this is going to be our final question. Declan, as an operator, how quickly, if I implement the solutions you were talking about, how quickly will they have an impact on my energy efficiency? And how do I get that process started? So very practical hands-on questions there.
I mean, it's very quick. Our approach is conversation with the operator, discussion around their priorities, agreeing on what matters, what they're trying to achieve, we deploy software in the network management system, we can have it up and running, delivering real savings within a period of about 6 weeks.
Good stuff. Okay. So as I say, that was our final question. We've run out of time there, but we've covered a lot of good ground. So thank you to the panel.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to you, the audience. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for all your good questions. Any questions we haven't been able to answer, we will endeavour to answer by email, so we'll respond that way. And you can watch a replay of this webinar back through the Mobile World Live website, so look out for that. But thanks again for joining us.